So guys, it's my pleasure to have this fantastic speaker to have with us once again, this time to talk about when worlds collide, the offline to online consumer experience. Big round of applause, Tony Long for Philip Morris. Tony.
Thanks, my friend. Good day. I hope everybody is doing well. I hope you've had a really good day as we did yesterday. I have to tell you, I believed that this day would happen again. I believed that we would all be able to be together again in person, that we'd be able to meet, we'd be able to exchange ideas, and we would be able to learn from each other in the best way possible. I apologize again. My Portuguese is not nearly good enough for me to be able to do this in your language, but I have been backed by outstanding translators, both in the written world and in the spoken world here every year that I've been here, and I'm eternally grateful. So, a little bit about me. I think it's, I was given a very, very wonderful introduction by my family here. I've been around. I'm old enough to know what Netscape was before there was even a Google. I've gotten involved in global brands as well as startups, but I guess the most important thing really is that I do write the future shopping column for E-Commerce Brasil, and I've been doing it for many years now, and I have a tremendous amount of fun doing it. I learn a tremendous amount, both from the feedback as well as the research that I have to do to come up with the subject matters. And I've been here before to speak amongst you and to speak with you and to meet you and to get into the conversations that we have to make things really drive the business forward. So why are we here? We're here to talk about what happens when the worlds collide. And these worlds that we're talking about are online and offline shopping. Because e-commerce really does abstract the real-life shopping experience to the digital channel. And that may seem like a very antiseptic way of looking at things. E-commerce is really shopping on Prozac. The highs aren't so high, but the lows are a lot easier to manage. And so, unlike a lot of the presentations that we've seen, that we've learned from with a lot of the other speakers, we're going to move this conversation away from the technology and away from the statistics, and we're going to focus on consumer behavior. Because we have a gap we need to bridge. And that gap is the gap between the offline world and the online world. And this gap has always existed, but we have never seen a better opportunity than now to make it happen. And there are many companies that are working on this, but offline retail still dominates. It still dominates, even after COVID. It dominates not just consumer spending, but it dominates their behaviors. And so if you have stores and you have an e-commerce site, chances are they are not managed by the same team. And if you think about that, that seems a little bit silly, doesn't it? Because there probably isn't anybody here with the title on their LinkedIn profile, Total Commerce Overlord, right? You have different departments doing approximately the same thing with what is increasingly the same consumer. So today we're going to talk about things in 4 stages. First of all, online to offline. What is it? I mean, we know what the words are. We want to get into some detail. We're going to talk about some high-level definitions. We're going to discuss the notion of participatory culture, and we're going to reclaim ownership of the consumer's experience. Then we're going to bring in the bright, shiny objects, and there are 3 specific themes relative to how commerce operates today that will take us into tomorrow that we're going to talk about. Then we're going to discuss the notion of curation, and curation as the link between the online and offline experiences. We'll discuss the differences between personalization and customization. We'll discuss the notion of a living profile, and we'll talk about the 3 approaches that you can start to activate to bring curation around. Then we're going to try to land the plane and get you kind of ready for your budget cycle. But first, today is the 9th of January, 2023. It's 167 days since we sat here today. You've just gotten back from the holidays. You're ready to start the year up. Oh, by the way, 167 days equals 240,480 minutes. And this is because my kids will have asked me that question. Daddy, how many minutes? Anyway, the idea is that you have come back from the forum. you're infused with ideas, the conversations you've had in the hallway, the booths of the vendors, the presentations that you've seen, and you're ready to start to move your business forward. You enter your budget cycle, the endless budget cycle, starting probably with planning in August, starting then with the ask of what you want in September, and then they ask you to refine in October, right? And you've got to get this right, because your world now is a world with two sources of light and power, and that is the online to the offline worlds. And in these talks we have here, we're not predicting the future, because predicting the future is very much of an edgy game. And to define this for you, imagine QR codes. In 2002, if you had a strong QR code strategy, you were a genius. Then in 2012, if you had a strong QR code strategy, you looked quaint and old-fashioned. But in 2022, if you've got a strong QR code strategy, you're a genius again, right? Here's the thing, none of any of this matters if your data layer is solid and if your strategy is sound. Yesterday in one of the other conversations, somebody asked the speaker about the impact of a headless architecture in e-commerce on performance. And headless architecture only lets you have the flexibility of the interface. It doesn't really, it's invisible to the consumer. If you have the data layer that's solid, you can pretty much do whatever you want, because it's never really about the tech. And e-commerce improvements have almost always been focused on the performance of the search, the performance of the delivery, the performance of the fulfillment. And so really, what I want you guys to walk away from here today is that instead of applying tech, we need to develop new ways to advance the consumer's experience. And so we talk about offline to online, and what is it anyway? Because these words, mean almost everything and nothing to anybody. Offline to online is the bridging of the consumer's experience and activities from an action that may be invisible to you to an online event where the activity can create more data that can be tracked and acted upon, okay? So our good friend from Meta was just up here and was talking to us about Instagram, and Instagram is a very, very good example, and what they're doing these days is very, very smart. You've heard of product tags, right? Starting from 2016, these have been in the production environment for Instagram. And the idea is that product tags in April of this year opened up to be used by all US users of Instagram, right? And the notion of what product tags impact was, according to the Business of Fashion magazine, was to dramatically expand access to a tool that had previously been reserved for brands and influencers. So they went from a very specialized user base to a very generalized user base. And it's kind of smart. The tags direct users to an in-app web page, where they can see information about an item and even buy it without leaving Instagram. Again, very, very smart. But the one question you always have to ask when you're planning for something like this is that you need to know why people would do this, because it doesn't really matter that they do it in the US first. Why would anyone take the time to tag a product in Instagram? So there's a couple of reasons why this could be. For one, the model envisions a time when consumers could be rewarded with a micro commission for tagging something that led to a trackable sale. And look, it sounds pretty obvious, right? And as a business process, it's pretty definable. But it is really, really hard to implement and to track and to measure. And so if we go back to the consumer intention cube, which we discussed last year in our forum conversation, we talked about how you have these 4 areas where a consumer is being pulled by their competing interests and the inputs they have from media, and they have an established bias, and they also have their data availability. And you don't really know which of those drove the sale, okay? Now, if you have something like tags, what happens if the retailer's out of stock? What do you do then? Are they out of the commission, right? And this brings us to the notion of participatory culture. Because the other reason why a consumer would want to do this is because they want to participate, and people do this, and this is becoming a very new and common consumer behavior. And as we talk about this over the next couple of minutes, you'll see yourself in this. So the way that you define participatory culture it is an opposing concept to consumer culture. Participatory culture is where people don't just take what you're giving them, but they want to give back. They want to participate. And the term is most often applied to media, right? And TikTok is a very good example of this, where people will take a song that was long thought to be dead, and they attach it to a new updated video, and then that song takes off again. Does anybody here remember Foursquare? Foursquare was the app where you would go someplace and you would check in. And if you checked in enough, you became the mayor of that place, right? And if you would let your friends know that you were there. Why did we do this? I did it. Why did we do this? There was absolutely zero incentive given to us to do this by Foursquare. But this behavior continues. Every time you go to a restaurant and you take a picture of your dinner with your phone, because we've all done this, and you post it on Instagram and you tag the restaurant. Why are you doing this? There's really no particular reason that you're doing this other than you are participating. You're out there, you're letting people know that you're out there, and there's other aspects that will also sort of attract you to do this, which we will cover. Now, there was in 2006 a scholarly paper written by this guy, Henry Jenkins, and his 4 co-authors, entitled Confronting the Challenges of Participatory Culture, Media Education for the 21st Century. Scholarly papers can never have a normal title. They have to have this incredibly long title that is impossible to remember. But they make some key points about what participatory culture is and how it operates. I think it's really important for us when we consider the future of shopping. There's a low barrier to artistic expression. There's strong support for creating and sharing your creations with others. There's always some type of informal mentorship where people who are really experienced with this help people who are less experienced. And the people who do contribute believe that their contributions matter. And finally, they feel like there's a social connection between the other people who also contribute. This is telling us shopping is becoming a two-way street, more and more. And this is why consumers seek out opportunities to participate. Now, we've always said that brands should inspire positive actions from their consumers, and we see this in the prevalence of ratings and reviews for service and for products. We see it most often online with social, online with influencers. We see it online with everybody who has access to a product and access to any one of the most popular social media embassies. The point is that anyone can be a critic, and the most ardent critics become influencers. But the more interesting and perhaps the more difficult pathway actually happens in the real world, where in a one-on-one real-life shopping experience, there's any number of ways to take a shopper and turn the shopper into a purchaser, and then turn the purchaser into an advocate. So you've got these two worlds, one which is pretty easy to track, one for which there is an existing and emerging consumer behavior, and the other one which is a mindless behavior that consumers engage in when they go shopping. And the key is to identify and recognize the offline sales activity that generally is not seen online, and to bring it into your world. We want to prompt participatory behaviors, and we want to reward a consumer's loyalty. And we want to reclaim ownership of the consumer's experience, as well as, the most important part, the data that is produced by the consumer's activities. How do you get somebody who's purchased something in a gas station or in a convenience store back into your ecosystem so you can give them the level of reward and the level of service that you're looking for? Which brings us to the bright, shiny objects. And we've heard so much about the metaverse. I'm not discussing our previous speaker's company. I'm talking literally about the metaverse. And what happens with virtual reality is that when people have an actual reality that they don't quite know what to do with, they just create another one. But they're not solving the fundamental problems. And one of the fundamental problems is that e-commerce is becoming old-fashioned. With rapid delivery services, you've got new direct-to-consumer propositions, you've got augmented reality in supermarkets. It's becoming a dated concept. And this is not my notion. Mia Sorgi from PepsiCo said in, I guess it was March of this year, that e-commerce is a dated sales proposition. And if we view e-commerce as a sales discipline, as a sales proposition, as a sales channel, instead of a consumer experience, we are stuck. And we here must unstuck ourselves. We have to get to a place where we are regarding e-commerce as the consumer experience, which means we have to bring these two worlds together. So in the State of Fashion Technology, which was a report done in the Business of Fashion magazine along with McKinsey, they outlined these 5 key themes. The bottom 2 don't matter to us. They're not germane to our conversation. But the top 3 are very germane, and they are not at all limited to fashion. So we're going to dive in a little bit and talk about them. For the metaverse reality check, there were 2 things that were said in the report that made me kind of sit up and go, wait a minute. 1, the next frontier for leading brands will be to translate unproven technologies into sustainable revenue streams. Okay? The other one I saw was that the pace of adoption will be driven by technological advancement, blah, 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 blah. Brands need to develop technologies that help evolve today's unrefined virtual experiences into mature, immersive realities. So when you see something like this, your first question always has to be why? Why is it my hurdle to translate the unproven tech into a sustainable revenue stream? I'm a brand. I make products. I'm a retailer. I sell products. Why is this my responsibility? And why is it that I have to help evolve today's unrefined virtual experiences? Why is it up to me to do this? And then I read this. Mass consumer adoption could be a significant hurdle. 78% of people who have ventured into virtual worlds say that they miss physical interaction. To which I say, and all of us here say, duh. I think we knew that. I think we knew that if you have a virtual-only system that people don't necessarily just dive right in. They may dabble a little bit, but they're still working in the real world. And so then all you're left with is a silly meme, such as this one from PwC, put the me in metaverse. That's really like kind of terrible. Meta, the company that was up here before us, they have not just made an investment into the notion of the metaverse and where this is going. They've gambled their entire company brand on it, which is very significant and very telling. But this also then brings us to the notion of hyper-personalization, because hyper-personalization is where we start to connect some of the dots between the online and the offline worlds. Now, nobody particularly loves the impact of fast fashion on the ecology or on some of the emerging economies. But H&M, it must be said, is doing some pretty interesting stuff in this department. And one area that they're sort of looking at, which was reported, is that they were setting up a system where a consumer could log into a purchase, could log their purchases into a digital wardrobe. Then when they were visiting a store, the H&M app could guide them to other parts of the store where they could see other items that they might like based on their past purchases. It becomes sort of an in-store, if then that. Now, 2017, we discussed at this forum the notion of the teenager's messy bedroom. The idea being that we, as brands and as retailers, may not fully understand what a consumer thinks about their choices, but the consumer certainly knows. The teenager's messy bedroom is the example of this. You go and you see a tornado, it hit the place. In fact, the teenager knows where everything is and it all makes sense to him somehow. Which then brings us to the notion of the connected store. Now, this page came from a video on YouTube that Microsoft published about their solutions for retail. And it's kind of interesting. I want to sort of point out a couple of these bullet points for you, because this is a very data-centric approach to what a connected store could be. But if you look at this, they're measuring how many customers are in store. They're measuring how many customers are near a particular end cap. They're measuring the number of transactions, right? They're measuring the number of customers that are in a queue. They're measuring what kind of activities happening in different parts of the store. And if you apply this to your e-commerce KPIs, your metrics that you're tracking, it kind of sounds like it, right? So I got how many pages they landed on, how many pages they visited before they went to the product detail page. Did they have an abandoned shopping cart? So your metrics feel pretty similar, right? Let's go to the other side now. And this is from McKinsey. And this is their version of a connected store. Don't try to read this. You will get the slides. You can take a look at it there. But here's the point. In this world, There's the magical reality that never exists, that IT is fully aligned with your strategy. And so you have perfect movement of data between the back of the house and the front of the house, which enables things like I look at the products through an app at home, I register a couple that I want to see, I make an appointment and show up, and I can experience them there in real life. Then I can buy them and take them home, or I can have them delivered. And we all here can develop these scenarios in our heads, right? So it becomes a little bit of an interesting thought experiment to imagine what this consumer activity could be that bridges these two environments. But here's the key. If the data knows where and when it needs to, where it needs to go and when, and the consumer has something to touch, whether it's physical or whether it's a good interface, you can then really generate some real evolution in your shopping experience. And you start to really tie these two worlds together because it's complicated. And we have a strong dependency in all of these scenarios and in every other parts of our lives on the presence and the flow of data. And data is not consumer-facing. Now, it's important to keep in mind, I'm always down on the bright, shiny objects. I'm always suspect of the bright, shiny objects. I'm always asking why. Every bright, shiny object does have the potential to deliver on its potential. And it's up to us to identify which of these bright, shiny objects have applicability and whether or not the investment in the data structure that we need to make is worth it. And the question is, what is that thing then, if we're going to be motivated and driven by data? What is that thing that the consumer gets or experiences that will then help them create more data that is useful to us? And that thing becomes content and or merchandising, which brings us to the notion of curation. And curation is basically how you present what you want to say, deciding which things you want to say that really help you define yourself, and presenting them in a way that makes sense to the consumer. And what makes your content or your merchandising unique is what establishes your brand as uniquely yours, and this is curation. And so to talk about curation, we have to sort of separate and define the differences between personalization and customization. Personalization is driven by the brand. It's based on data that the brand has collected about the consumer. Customization is something that the consumer does on their own, and they set up their own experience to be to their liking. And what gives these sibling concepts power is the creative application of a subject matter expertise. And that's what brings curation. And subject matter expertise is us. It's person. It's people driving what we want to say. And so a handy definition of curation that we'll find in Wikipedia is the selection, organization, and presentation of online content, merchandise information, using professional or expert knowledge. Because curation is neither really personalized nor customized. Because when you think about personalization and customization, this sounds hard and expensive. But curation allows the consumer to kind of self-select their interests. Of the things I'm showing to you, these are the things I'm gravitating towards. And you can deliver an experience that feels personalized but hasn't really been personalized. And you can deliver a customized environment that hasn't really been customized because as a brand or as a retailer, and I am talking to consumers about myself, but I'm talking about them to them in a way that should be relevant to those who are listening. So I invite one segment of a consumer to this type of an event, and I omit this other segment because it's not going to be relevant to them. And in this way, I'm delivering what feels like an environment that the consumer has self-selected for themselves. This comes from Accenture, and this is Accenture's model for the living profile. And the living profile is one of the key concepts we have to discuss here because it's one that has evolved vastly since I was first here in 2017. And the notion of a living profile is that it goes beyond what a customer buys or consumes and captures the more detailed nuances that explain why customers make these choices, right? Now, this was in the halcyon days of 2018 when people weren't as aware of their data being used as currency by large companies, right? And so the idea that this graphic shows you all of these, I just chose a random category of photography apps. And look at the level of consumer data that each of these were pulling from your phone when you use the app. Why would you need all this data between VSCO and Pinterest, right? You just don't need all that data. But nearly 3/4 of the respondents of a survey in 2018 said that they would be happy to use these living profiles if they were used to curate experiences, offers, and products that they receive, right? But here in 2022, we're avoiding third-party cookies. We don't want to be seen as doing something that's hidden from view. We want to have a wealth of consumer information, but we want it to be from people we actually know. We don't want to invite a bunch of random people to the party. We want to have a party with people that we know. And we want to work with people with whom we have a specific agreement on the use of their data and their profiles. Getting there starts not with the technology, but it starts with process. And there are at least 21 companies here at the forum this year that specialize in tools to customize shopping. And if you talk to them, go out there and hit the booths and talk to people, you will be able to find many companies that offer capabilities in their stack to deliver this for you. Now, they will not show you their stack. They will first talk to you about the process that your company will have to change and adopt in order for you to gain and use this data. Because data ultimately drives what curation is, right? And even if you are of relatively modest budgetary capabilities in your company, you can still use this data and take advantage of the social media properties that are out there to develop a living profile for a consumer. And then this will help you drive an SEO strategy and will help you drive a native advertising strategy. And you say, okay, hold on. Back up. Why are we talking about native advertising and SEO all of a sudden? Well, we're talking about it because if we go back to the principles behind the consumer intention cube, we don't really know what made a consumer purchase. We don't know which of those activities that happened as a consumer was in a consideration stage pushed them over the edge and made them do a transaction, or not. Maybe they didn't even do the transaction. And so you have to use all of the tools that are available to you at any budgetary level to try to guide the consumer to a place where you want them to be and where you can help them, where you can deliver something for them that's going to make their experience with your product and with your brand unique. So there are 3 quick approaches we can use for 2023 and beyond. I'm going to go into them in detail, but just remember this. Nurture, scale up, gain. So first, we want to nurture the direct relationship with the consumer. Have brand building opportunities that yield shareable experiences. You know, you could thank the consumer instead of just asking them to buy something. And this is a random act of kindness you can do that then becomes shareable. And you have a tiered loyalty scheme that rewards a consumer for giving you the information that they bought something in a gas station that would otherwise be invisible to you. 2, you can scale up your one-to-one experiences to build your consumer database, and this means opt-in. It's very simple. Put together offerings for consumers only if they're opted in. Number 3, you want to gain subscribers, and then you want to convert them into opted-in shoppers. And so you can build a library of content that is behind a subscription. We have to be subscribed to get to it. You can use paper mail to send a code that can be used with a phone to unlock additional deals. Again, you have no excuses. This is the world's biggest event of its type. The people are out there to help you make good on some of these opportunities. So let's turn the lights off. There we go. And so, it is the 9th of January, 2023. You're starting the year. You've been thinking hard about your strategies. You've been thinking hard about how you want to approach life. You've been thinking how you want to align the chakras of offline to online retail. You've come up with 2, maybe 3 programs that you can put in place, and you can start to create these long-term changes for your company. Getting this done is not about money. You probably don't need incremental budget. What you need is prioritizing where you're spending your time and your effort and your money. So maybe you need to take those 2 departments that are online and offline, and you need to merge them into a single department. Why don't you pool their budgets and then have them all come to the table, all your senior leaders come to the table, and make them work out how to reprioritize this to deliver on some of these. Maybe this is too big of a deal, and maybe 2023 needs to stay business as usual while you plan and implement these changes. Because however you approach this is going to be unique to your business. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is, it is time to unify the consumer's experience, because if you don't, somebody else will. And that's what happens when worlds collide. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. That was absolutely brilliant.
It's fun.
It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank
it's a small thing from us.
I
Just
love it.
remember us once again. You've got 4 or 5 days already,
I
right?
do, yeah, I know. But we
This
love
one
it.
from your collection. I've got one. Well, amazing content. Thank you so much for that. I've got one question,
Yep.
just for us to round
Yep.
this up.
Yes.
You talked about how tech is important, but we need to improve customer experience, and I love that. I'm really believing on that. And there's a part of me that feels like the e-commerce, as you said the thing about stuck and we have to unstuck.
Right.
And there's a part of me that sees that the e-commerce experience has been stuck for a while.
Yeah.
The technology has improved, the strategy has improved, customer acquisition has improved, but the experience is a bit stuck.
Yeah.
Whereas the offline experience, the shops out there, using more technology, using AR that you've mentioned as well, have somehow improved the experience quite a bit.
Yes.
Can you expand a bit more on that? And how can the e-commerce also get unstuck on the experience?
Yeah, it really comes down to thinking about your consumer as a whole person, not just an online person, not just their online persona. And it's really easy to focus on a consumer's online persona because that's where you see them. You don't see them when they're in a convenience store buying the product. You may not see them when they're browsing in the store and they haven't bought anything. Right? So what you need to do to make that experience whole is to give the consumer an incentive to participate with you online where it's measurable, even when they're offline. And especially maybe when they're offline. You might want to especially provide an incentive to a consumer to purchase from a third-party retailer, even if you have your own e-commerce site. You might want your e-commerce site to be limited to specials, to unique items, but push consumers to third-party retail if it's more convenient for them. So they're not mutually exclusive, and this is the way to think about it.
Absolutely not. Once again, guys, big round of applause for Tony. Tony, once again,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
E aí, gostou do vídeo? Então não deixe de curtir e compartilhar. Aqui do lado tem 2 sugestões que você pode gostar. Até a próxima!